There's a building in Manhattan you'll never be allowed inside. No sign, no logo, just an address on Wall Street that most people walk past without noticing. Inside that building, in 1948, a group of men sat around a table and designed your life. Not the life you wanted, the life they needed you to have. They calculated exactly how much money you needed to earn to keep showing up, how much debt you could carry before you broke, how many years you could work before your body gave out. They weren't thinking about your happiness. They were thinking about efficiency, about extraction, about how to turn a human being into a reliable economic unit. And they succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. You are living in their blueprint right now. Every morning, your alarm goes off in the dark. You drag yourself out of bed, shower, dress in clothes you don't really like, drive to a place you don't want to be, and spend 8 hours doing work that doesn't matter to you. Then you drive home through traffic, eat dinner in front of a screen, collapse into bed, and do it all over again. 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year, for 40 years. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a voice keeps whispering that something is wrong, that this isn't what life was supposed to be. But you ignore that voice because everyone else is doing the same thing, so it must be normal. It must be right. Except it's not normal, and it definitely isn't right. This system, this rat race, this trap you're in, it was built, engineered, designed by people who understood exactly what they were doing. And if you go back far enough, you can find the exact moment when freedom was replaced with obligation, when a home became a prison, and when the American dream quietly transformed into the longest con in modern history. Let me take you back, not to last year, not to 2008, further back, to a time before the trap was fully built. Picture America in 1890. Your great-great-great-grandfather lives in a world that would be completely unrecognizable to you. If he owns land, he probably bought it outright, paid cash, or he worked it until it was his. No bank involved, no 30-year contract. If he lives in a city, he rents a room in a boarding house for a few dollars a month, or he lives above his shop, or he built a small place himself with lumber and nails and his own 2 hands. Work exists, yes, but it's different. It's seasonal. It's episodic. You work the harvest in summer. You work the docks when ships come in. You work construction when there's a building going up. And when there's no work, you don't work. You fish. You hunt. You fix things. You rest. The concept of a 40-hour work week doesn't exist yet because time isn't measured that way. You don't sell hours. You sell results. You sell labor. You work until the job is done, and then you stop. There's no such thing as clocking in. No punch cards. No timesheets. Time is just time. It belongs to you. Then the factories came. The Industrial Revolution arrived in America like a slow-moving storm. First in the textile mills of New England, then in the steel foundries of Pittsburgh, then everywhere. Suddenly, work wasn't about the task anymore. It was about the clock. About showing up at the same time every day and standing at the same station and repeating the same motion for 8, 10, 12 hours straight. The factory owners had a problem, though. People hated it. It wasn't natural. Human beings aren't designed to stand in one spot doing the same repetitive motion all day long in a building with no windows. We're designed for variety, for autonomy, for rhythm. Hunt in the morning, rest in the afternoon, gather in the evening, tell stories at night. The factory was the opposite of everything human nature wanted. So workers quit, they organized, they struck, they burned down factories. The early labor movement wasn't polite. It was violent because the conditions were violent. Factory owners hired private armies. The Pinkertons. They beat workers. They shot workers. They broke strikes with clubs and guns. But violence only works for so long. Eventually, the factory owners realized they needed a different strategy. They needed to make people want to stay. They needed to make the cage feel like freedom. Enter Henry Ford. In 1914, Henry Ford did something that made other industrialists think he'd lost his mind. He started paying his workers $5 a day. This was more than double the going rate. Other factory owners were furious. They called him a socialist, a traitor to his class. But Ford wasn't being generous. He was being brilliant. He understood something profound about human psychology. If you pay a man just enough to survive, he'll keep looking for the exit. He'll quit the moment something better comes along. But if you pay him enough to buy things, to dream about owning things, to taste what prosperity feels like, then you've got him. Not forever, but long enough. Ford's workers started buying Ford's cars, Model Ts rolling off the same assembly lines they worked on. They started buying small houses on the outskirts of Detroit. They started buying furniture, radios, appliances. And to buy all these things, they needed credit. They needed loans. And to pay back those loans, they needed to keep working every single week, without interruption, without complaint. The psychology was perfect. You weren't trapped. You were prospering. You weren't enslaved. You were building equity. You weren't giving up your freedom. You were achieving the American dream. But it wasn't a dream yet. Not fully. Because in the 1920s, people still remembered another way of living. They still had parents and grandparents who owned their land free and clear, who answered to no boss, who lived without debt. The cultural memory of freedom was still alive. The system needed something bigger, something that would make the old way seem impossible and the new way seem inevitable. It needed a crisis. October 1929. The stock market collapses. Not slowly, all at once. In a single day, billions of dollars of wealth evaporate. Banks fail by the thousands. People who had life savings one day have nothing the next. Farms are foreclosed. Families are thrown out of their homes with their furniture piled on the sidewalk. Hunger spreads across the country like a disease. Breadlines stretch around city blocks. Men who used to have jobs, dignity, purpose, now stand in lines for soup. The Great Depression doesn't just destroy the economy. It destroys the psyche. It breaks something fundamental in the American spirit. And into that brokenness steps the government, Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, Social Security, federal jobs programs, the Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, and most importantly for our story, the Federal Housing Administration, the FHA, created in 1934 with one explicit purpose: to get Americans buying houses again, to restart the economy by turning citizens into homeowners. But there was a problem. Nobody had any money. The banks had failed. Savings were gone. The traditional way of buying a house, saving up and paying cash, or taking out a short-term loan for 3 to 5 years was impossible for most people. So the government invented something new: the 30-year mortgage. Before the 1930s, the idea of taking 30 years to pay off a house was insane, absurd, unthinkable. Mortgages were short-term, high down payment affairs. You put down 50%, borrowed the rest, and paid it back in 5 years, maybe 10 at the absolute most. The idea of being in debt for 3 decades was not just unusual. It was considered financially reckless and morally questionable. But the FHA changed all of that. They created a system of government-backed mortgages with low down payments, 10% or even less, and long repayment terms, 30 years. The payments were small enough that almost anyone with a steady job could afford them. Suddenly, homeownership was accessible to the masses. And that's when the trap snapped shut. Because a 30-year mortgage isn't ownership. It's indentured servitude with better marketing. You don't own the house. The bank owns the house. You're renting it from the bank, 1 month at a time, for 360 payments. And if you miss even one of those payments, if you lose your job, if you get sick, if anything goes wrong, the bank takes everything. You lose the house. You lose every payment you've already made. You lose the down payment. You're back to zero, except now you're older and you've wasted years of your life paying someone else's mortgage, but they didn't call it that. They called it the American dream. The brilliance of the scheme was in the framing. You weren't going into debt. You were building equity. You weren't trapping yourself in a 30-year obligation. You were investing in your future. You weren't surrendering your freedom. You were achieving stability. The language was perfect, and it worked. By the 1950s, the transformation was complete. World War II ended. Soldiers came home. The GI Bill offered government-backed mortgages with zero down payment. Zero. You could buy a house with nothing but a promise to pay. The suburbs exploded overnight. Levittown in New York, Lakewood in California. Identical houses stretching to the horizon, each one requiring a mortgage, each one requiring a man with a stable job. The culture shifted completely. If you didn't own a home, you were a failure. If you didn't have a car, 2 cars, you were falling behind. If you didn't have a television, a refrigerator, a washing machine, the newest appliances, you were poor. Even if you had to go into debt to get them. Keeping up with the Joneses stopped being a joke and became a religion, and the financial industry loved it. Banks made fortunes on mortgage interest. 30 years of steady, predictable payments from millions of households. It was the most profitable business model ever invented. But it required one thing. It required you to keep working, no matter what. No matter how much you hated your job, no matter how sick it made you, no matter how much you wanted to quit and do something else. Because if you stopped working, you lost everything. The mortgage was the chain. But it wasn't the only one. In the 1950s, credit cards were invented. Diners Club in 1950. American Express in 1958. Bank AmeriCard, which became Visa in 1958. Suddenly, you didn't even need to save money to buy things. You could buy now and pay later. The entire consumer economy was built on this principle. Buy things you can't afford with money. You don't have to impress people you don't like. And it worked because the culture reinforced it at every level. Advertising exploded. Television brought commercial messages directly into your living room. Billboards lined every highway. Magazines were more advertisement than content. And all of it was designed to make you feel inadequate. To make you feel like you needed more, needed better, needed newer. The system had perfected itself. It trapped your body with debt and trapped your mind with inadequacy. Let's fast forward. 1970s. Wages stop growing. For the first time in American history, a generation is earning less in real terms than their parents did. But costs keep rising. Housing gets more expensive. Healthcare gets more expensive. Education gets more expensive. The gap between income and expenses starts to widen. So what does the average family do? They adapt. Women enter the workforce in massive numbers. Not primarily because of feminism, though that played a role, but because one income is no longer enough. Now you need 2 incomes just to maintain the same standard of living your parents had with one. The trap tightens again. 1980s and 90s. Student loans explode. College used to be affordable. You could work a summer job and pay your tuition, but costs skyrocket. State funding for universities drops. Schools raise tuition to compensate. Now you need to borrow money just to get an education. $20,000, $50,000, $100,000, and that debt follows you forever. You can't discharge it in bankruptcy. You're trapped before you even start your career. You graduate with massive debt, which means you need a high-paying job immediately, which means you can't take risks, can't try something different, can't follow your passion unless your passion happens to be profitable. 2000s. The housing bubble. Housing prices go completely insane. In coastal cities, a modest house costs $500,000, $700,000, $1 million. And people buy them because they're told real estate always goes up. It's an investment. Except it's not an investment when you're paying it with borrowed money. It's speculation. And when the bubble bursts in 2008, millions of people lose everything. The entire economy nearly collapses. Banks get bailed out. Homeowners get nothing. And what's the lesson? The lesson is that the system doesn't care about you. It cares about perpetuating itself. Which brings us to today. Right now. This moment. You're living in the most sophisticated debt trap ever constructed. You probably have a mortgage, or you're paying rent that's as high as a mortgage. You probably have a car payment. The average car payment in America is over $700 a month now, for 6-7 years. You probably have student loans. The average is $30,000, but many people have much more. You probably have credit card debt. The average American household carries over $6,000. Add it all up, and the average person is spending almost all of their income just servicing debt and covering basic expenses. There's nothing left over. No savings, no freedom, no options. And that's exactly how the system wants it. Because if you have no savings, you can't quit your job. If you can't quit your job, you can't say no to bad working conditions. If you can't say no, you have no leverage. And if you have no leverage, you'll accept whatever you're given. Lower wages, fewer benefits, longer hours. The system has you exactly where it wants you, desperate enough to keep working but never comfortable enough to leave. So, how do you escape? And I don't mean running to the woods and living in a cabin. That's one option, sure, but it's not the only one. The real escape isn't geographic. It's financial and psychological. It's about understanding the game and refusing to play by their rules. Here's the secret. You don't need as much as they told you. The entire system runs on manufactured desire, on making you feel inadequate so you'll keep consuming. But almost everything you've been told you need is optional. You need food. You need basic shelter. You need basic healthcare. You need meaningful relationships. That's it. Everything else is negotiable. The bigger house, the nicer car, the expensive vacation, the prestigious career. All optional, all choices. The moment you truly internalize that, the system loses its power over you. Let's talk numbers. Real numbers. The median household in America spends about $70,000 a year. The median income is roughly the same, which means most people are barely breaking even or slowly going into debt. But what if you cut your expenses in half? What if you lived on $35,000 a year? Suddenly, everything changes. You don't need to work full-time. You can work part-time. You can freelance. You can take 6 months off between jobs. The desperation disappears because your survival isn't dependent on continuous employment. How do you actually do this? Start with the biggest expense, housing. The average American spends over $20,000 a year on housing, either mortgage payments or rent. That's insane. It's unsustainable. So don't do it. Find cheaper housing. Rent a small apartment in a less expensive area. Get a roommate. Live with family temporarily while you save. Or buy a cheap house outright, not a dream house. A boring, functional house in a place nobody wants to live. They exist in the Midwest, in small towns, in forgotten neighborhoods. $40,000, $60,000, $80,000. Save up, pay cash, own it free and clear. Now your housing cost is just property taxes and maintenance, maybe $400 a month. Next, transportation. The average car payment is over $700 a month. That's $8,400 a year just in payments, not counting insurance, gas, and maintenance. It's financial suicide. Buy a used car for cash. $3,000, $5,000. Something boring and reliable. A Honda Civic, a Toyota Corolla. Drive it until the wheels fall off. Your transportation cost just dropped to insurance and fuel, maybe $200 a month. Food. The average American spends $700 a month on food. But you can eat perfectly well for half that if you cook at home, buy in bulk, and avoid restaurants. That's not deprivation. That's being intentional. Healthcare is the hard one in America. The system uses healthcare as a weapon. Lose your job, lose your insurance. But there are workarounds, catastrophic coverage plans, health-sharing ministries, direct primary care, medical tourism for major procedures. It's not perfect, but it's possible. Add it all together. Housing, $400 a month. Car, $200. Food, $300. Healthcare, $400. Utilities and phone, $200. That's $1,500 a month. $18,000 a year. Add another $12,000 for everything else. Clothes, entertainment, emergencies, savings. You're at $30,000 a year. And at that level, you're free. You can work a simple job and save half your income. You can work part of the year and travel the rest. You can start a business without the terror of failure destroying you. You can walk away from a toxic workplace because you don't need them. This is the real escape. Not running away, but building a life so simple and cheap that the system can't touch you. The machine will fight you on this. Culture will fight you. Your parents will tell you you're wasting your potential. Your friends will think you're crazy. Social media will make you feel like you're falling behind. But you're not. You're waking up. You're seeing the cage for what it is, and you're choosing something different. The rat race isn't a law of nature. It's a system built by people who profited from your obedience. And every system has exits. You just have to be willing to take them.